My plan here today is to be able to share how we're going to benefit from the Philippine-China relations, given that there are so many types of opinions floating around, opinions and information. So we're talking about possible models for our decision making as well as clarification of facts. So to start with, like any decisions that we want to do, what we need to do is to have an understanding of the facts. And as Confucius says, that to start with any project successfully, you start by naming things by their proper name, which means knowing what's the reality. And then we have to look at decision models, which depends. We want to pick ones that have shown successful modeling in the past, rather than those who are purely theoretical that some of the think tanks are doing. So if we're going to see the times today, there are massive tides. And what does this mean? Because it's easier to go with the tide than to go against the tide. So when we want to make decisions, where are the tides leading? And can we use it? For instance, the stock markets this year in the pandemic, everybody says when there's blood in the streets, you invest. So instead of 1% a year you get from the bank, you probably had, if you had invested in March at the height of the pandemic, 40 to 70% returns already. So we're talking about what is the opportunities and what are the tides today. I had a mentor once who said that, advising me whether to start something or not, he said, if you have he didn't give me an answer. He said, if the fruit is ripe, it will fall easily and it will taste sweet. If the fruit is not ready, it's not ripe, it's going to be hard to pull. And if you force to take it, it's going to be bitter. So some examples, I'm sorry, we're going to be a little disjointed here, is there, of course, we have disputes with China. So we want to point out that at the same time that we're competing, we are also cooperating. And that's a successful model that many countries have. For instance, let's say now, Vietnam, one of their biggest investors is China. Even though they have sometimes bitter disputes with China, at the same time, they go there to invite. So they're about to finish building their $900 million China MRT. So our view here of not using China projects or financing, it's not practical, because sometimes even when we have disputes with people, we can use their skills and their resources and networks. So for instance, General Motors in China sold 3 million cars last year. Volkswagen sold 4 million cars and had over $58 billion in sales. And the competitors, in fact, the biggest competitors in electric vehicles in China are both American companies. General Motors with SAIC joint venture, which is producing a 200,000 peso electric vehicle that is very cheap and is selling very well, outselling the Tesla. So Tesla and General Motors are competing to be number one in electric vehicles in China. And we can see also, for instance, that there are freight trains to UK, Turkey, and there are agreements between China, Japan, South Korea, even while they have disputes. Our biggest competition, in fact, is ourselves and our ASEAN neighbors in the race for development. So a little perspective. The Asian values and there are Western values, both with their advantages and disadvantages. It doesn't mean that one has to be the only one we use rather than the other. No, for instance, the Asian values of trying to harmonize and blend instead of an adversarial individual process. No, one of entrepreneurial self-reliance versus one of entitlement. Each has its own advantages, because when you are individualist, then you can move faster if you are very bright and you're a genius. But harmonizing, blending might prevent a lot of obstacles from becoming bigger obstacles over time. So this is an example of two different philosophies. General Motors in China is selling a $4,000 car that was the number one seller in electric vehicles in the last quarter. And before that, it's the $40,000, $30,000 vehicle of Tesla. Two very different philosophies and both doing very well in China, and they're both American companies. So roadblocks, right now, what I'm going to deal with is a little about the roadblock that comes from our perceptions. There are misleading news. Perhaps the informations we're looking at in the models might need some clarification. For instance, what is this talk about debt trap, a lot of it talking about debt trap. No? So one of that is, we can say, for instance, the Sri Lanka debt trap that they talked about. China's loans is only about 13%, 8 billion out of $65 billion in debt. So how could it be the China situation is the problem? Because the port is doing, China has reinvested 70%. So that means practically 70% will be covered also by China itself. And the port is improving in its operations. And we will show, for instance, that, well, this might be one that met some problems and is being mitigated, but there are a lot of successful investments and joint ventures that are not being pointed out yet. No? So if we're looking also at the interest rates, if we're looking at failed projects, just for perspective, the Philippine experience before has been our biggest project. In fact, our 11 major industrial projects have all failed under programs with the World Bank and multilateral institutions. That doesn't mean we don't have successful projects with the World Bank. So it really depends on the proponent. We have to make our own studies. The lending institutions are the ones just enabling us to do our projects. And if we look at the interest rates, we have to look at, there are discussions that the interest rates are crippling, because there's a lot of fake news that they're giving very high interest rates, when actually they're the lowest interest rates apart from Japan. So while Japan is giving a 0.5%, or in China was giving 2 or 3%, but the World Bank and other multilaterals were giving at 4 or 5%, right? And we have to look at beyond just the interest rates. We have to look at the cost of the projects. Because of this situation, we have to note that, for instance, there are waves of opportunities that we have missed. For instance, in the 1980s, when Japan was investing heavily outside of the country, we missed it because of our labor problems at that time, and the very fast increase in the wage rates and changing of the rules. In the 1990s, when Hong Kong was doing a turnover and there was a lot of investments coming out, Li Ka-shing won the bid to take over Subic Port twice, and he was willing to bring a third or a half of the volume of Hong Kong to the Philippines, but twice, because of nationalist reasons, we canceled the bids and gave it to another local company, which was never able to build up the volume. So we're missing it because of our frameworks, and this time maybe we'll try to catch up. So, for instance, an example of a successful project is the Piraeus port in Greece. Italy was told and pressured by other countries not to accept this investment for a port. So it moved to Greece. Greece accepted it. It was having a problem with its financing. And since it was taken over, the majority for 35-year operation, it has become the biggest port. It was at one point became the second biggest port in the Mediterranean, and is now the biggest port in the Mediterranean and one of the biggest in Europe. So from 1.5 ton equivalents, it has now a volume of over 5 million, 5.5 million ton equivalents. So it has become one of the most successful. These things, for some reason, don't get into a lot of the mainstream media. Next, please. So an example here that underscore, widely quoted here, from Forbes magazine, says that China was lending at 10 to 20%. Today, 2-3 years later, we know there's no such thing. And in fact, China is lending at the lowest rate. No? And so this is a very far. It's proven that it's a misinformation. So if we're looking at it this way, we are not going to be able to get the best rates just because of political reasons. So another news that people have that has widely spread is the announcement that we had 3 million Chinese invading the Philippines. Well, the statistics will show it's a matter of labeling. When we say 3 million, but it's in a sense it's an invasion. 3 million people came. That is the tourists over 3 years. That's over 3 years. So in the last year, in 2019, we had between, depending on the type of statistics, 1.3 million to 1.7 million tourists here. At the same year, Thailand had 11 million and asking for more. The same with Japan at 7 million, Vietnam at 6 million, and they were asking for more. So why are we, the largest population country in ASEAN aside from Indonesia, concerned when we have the smallest percent and smallest amount of tourists. Why is that perspective so different? Because we're looking at them as invaders. The other countries are looking at them as sources of income and as opportunities. We have to remember that most investments in the world start with tourism. People start visiting an area, then they start investing. And in 2019, there were 155 million Chinese tourists spending $270 billion, where the US tourists in total were spending 180 billion. So we're looking at a very, very potentially large industry, and we're just right beside China. That's 155 billion out of 1.4 billion population. That means they're expecting it actually to double over the next 10 years. So the opportunity for the Philippines is very great. And the pandemic situation now is a temporary situation that we still have to look at where the trend is going to be. And that means tourism is going to be a major opportunity for the Philippines. It connects the Philippines to global markets. So that means we're not only having tourists, that means it's a manner of marketing the Philippines as a destination for investments. So we have to look at things with various perspectives. So there was a lot of talk that China's vaccines were good only for 50% versus 90+% by other vaccines. But we have to note that it seems sometimes that there's a deliberate misinformation here, because it was 52% on between 50 and 60% on the first round dosage, whereas all the other vaccines are the same. No, but they were quoting 50 something to 60 versus 90+, which is a 2-shot dosage. So we can see here in various news, we show an example here. Pfizer also has only below 60% as the first dose. So the comparison was not an accurate depiction of it's like being told a technology doesn't work when it doesn't apply to you in this form, but with a little adaptation, it can be very efficient for you. So it's something, we're not saying that we should use this, but we should be open to considering everything. So, for instance, the gains, people are criticizing, there are a lot of gains from the independent foreign policy. So this cluster effect we're talking here about, number one, is an example of what business modeling does. If there is one major investment in one place, it always brings the others. So when we opened the independent foreign policy, what happened was Japan's investment, even US and European investments, multiplied in the Philippines. Even though there was a lot of criticism about the manner of conduct of our government or the politics, what happened was the Japan's investment never, with the best relations during the previous administration under Aquino, we never had exceeded $1.5 billion. But now we're looking at $9 to $10 billion in investment under a situation where they are not being particularly favored. But because the situation and circumstances makes it favorable. So they are going to invest. The one single project, Metro Rail alone is already about $8 billion, not including others. So also during this time, we have Filipino teachers have been hired, and it doesn't come in the news that much. 30,000 Filipino teachers are hired at good rates, teaching from their homes to Chinese students. We also had assistance in the Marawi rebellion, in which during that time, the Western countries had banned sending supplies and ammunitions to the Philippines. This assistance from China and Russia, and then later joined by the US, allowed us to calm the rebellion within 8 months, a record time in the world. And also, of course, did not come in the media that much is that China forgave over $100 million in loans and gave over 3 billion in donations, pesos in donations for the various calamities that happened and problems here in the Philippines. There are also the 2 bridges that have been built, schoolhouses, and the different assistances. If we look at things, the assistance of China is a little different from the multilaterals. World Bank, IMF, ABDB provide financing. China is able to provide financing, markets, and technology. That doesn't mean we should block out the others, because we should choose whatever is the best combination for us, whatever is useful for us. And a very important part also is not just the investments, but the relationships and the cultural exchange, because this allows us not just with the China, but with the US, with Europe, we learn something from each culture that adds to our enterprises. And Filipinos, we want to share one exceptional secret is that that we have to consider. In most of the world now, the pure forms of technology or a model is not what is the winningest model. The champions come from combinations. So we're talking about, for instance, if we're talking sports, we know our best sports people are mixed blood, or we having use of foreign coaches. Wesley, our chess champion, is backed by a Filipino American, Lotis Key. Our beauty queens are hybrids. Also, our business models are hybrids. No, so we have to note that institutions enable. So governments will enable us. Our institutions will enable us. In the end, it's the people who have to do things and make use of this. So many of our models before failing to integrate this would be meeting difficulties or not reaching the success that we envision. So a lot of it has to do with our educational institutions and media helping give the right focus, the right perspective. Even while we're giving news from everybody, we have to be focusing on what is the most successful models we can find. So for engagement, we propose that we should stop blaming others and take responsibility. And we have to immerse and learn the game, especially where things are moving so fast. Now, the technology keeps changing, and we have to organize and help each other and not focus on politics. And as Art Valdez, a former USEC, said, the Cs originally were meant to unite us and not to divide us. Thank you very much.